Imagine for a second that you possess an impossibly advanced piece of technology, like a device that lets you perfectly track how a single thought moves through your brain.
Right, like zooming all the way up.
Exactly. You watch this tiny, almost imperceptible chemical spark leap across a microscopic gap. And then you watch that spark cascade. It builds and builds until it somehow transforms into a deeply held moral belief.
Wow.
A belief so powerful, so absolute, that it could literally compel you to sacrifice your own life for a complete stranger.
Well, welcome to the Deep Dive. We are thrilled you're here with us today because we're going to trace exactly how that transformation happened.
It's a really profound journey to track. I mean, we are crossing the bridge from raw microscopic biology to like the highest levels of human ethics and society.
Yeah, and our map for this journey today is a stack of excerpts from a truly fascinating book. It's called Social Brain Matters: Stances on the Neurobiology of Social Cognition.
It's a heavy title, but it's brilliant. It really is.
Yeah.
And this compilation was actually born out of the 2004 Universal Forum of Cultures in Barcelona, which was an event designed specifically to promote dialogue among different cultures.
Yeah.
And the mission for our deep dive today is to explore a pretty massive question. Can unselfishness be taught?
Right.
We're looking at how our biology interacts with our social world and why our brains are so incredibly prone to both beautiful, selfless cooperation and also absolutely horrific, violent conflict.
Yeah, the source material is dense. I mean, it draws heavily on philosophy, evolutionary biology, psychology, neuroscience. But the collision of these fields provides some of the most thrilling, just unexpected insights into human nature you will ever come across.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can understand how we learn highly complex, abstract moral concepts like unselfishness, we kind of have to understand how the brain learns anything at all.
Right, we just start at the bottom.
Exactly. Let's start at the very bottom. What is the literal physical mechanism of learning? Nuri Sebastian Galais have a chapter here that breaks it down, but the terminology gets a little intense.
It does, yeah. So to understand the physical foundation of learning, you have to look at a process called Long-Term Potentiation, or LTP. And the trick to understanding LTP is realizing that the neurons in your brain, like the cells actually doing the thinking, they don't touch each other.
But they don't touch at all.
Nope. There is a microscopic physical gap between them called a synapse. So when a signal travels down a neuron, it actually has to jump across that empty space using chemicals called neurotransmitters.
Okay, so if I'm picturing this, it's like the brain isn't just a solid computer hard drive recording data. It's more like a massive, constantly shifting road network. And the bridges between the roads, the synapses, are changing and adapting based on like how much traffic is trying to cross them.
That is exactly it. You're touching on the core of neuroplasticity there. When a specific neural pathway is used frequently, the biochemical reaction at that specific synapse actually changes.
Oh, wow.
It becomes stronger, it becomes more efficient. The bridge gets reinforced, right, to handle the heavier traffic. That reinforcement, that long-lasting increase in synaptic efficacy, is long-term potentiation. It is the literal physical manifestation of a memory or a newly learned behavior.
That's incredible to think about.
But here's the thing, the brain doesn't treat all traffic equally. Emotion plays a massive dictatorial role in deciding which of those bridges get built.
Right.
Nuri Sebastian Galais points this out using Shakespeare, actually. Think about how Macbeth opens, right? Thunder, lightning, 3 witches alone in this desolate place. It's an immediately terrifying, highly emotionally charged scene.
Shakespeare knew exactly what he was doing. I mean, he was basically hijacking the audience's emotional center, the amygdala.
Yes, exactly.
But how does that actually change the physical bridge we just talked about, like chemically?
Well, when the amygdala detects a threat, or just a spike of intense emotion, it acts as a chemical trigger. It floods those synaptic bridges with specific neurotransmitters and stress hormones.
Okay.
It's almost like pouring quick-drying cement on the road network. The pathway hardens instantly. It supercharges that long-term potentiation process so you never, ever forget the event.
And from an evolutionary standpoint, the survival logic there is pretty clear. Like, if a tiger attacks you near a specific river, your brain needs to permanently wire the concept of river equals danger so you survive the next time.
Exactly. It's life or death.
That makes total sense for survival. But the text also suggests that sometimes, no matter how high the stakes are, the brain just refuses to learn. There's a historical example referenced in the sources that absolutely blew my mind.
Oh, the Shibboleth story. Yeah, it is a startling account from the book of Judges in the Bible. So the Gileadites capture the river fords to cut off the fleeing Ephraimites, right? And to identify who is an Ephraimite, they make every single person crossing the river pronounce the word shibboleth.
Right.
But the Ephraimites' native dialect didn't have this sound. They physically could not say it. They said sibboleth. And because they couldn't pronounce that single phonetic sound, 42,000 of them were executed.
Wait, 42,000 people? I mean, if there was a literal sword to your throat, why couldn't you just, I don't know, force your brain to learn a new sound? The motivation to learn has never been higher.
A motivation is absolutely there, but the physical bridge is completely gone.
Wow.
See, in early childhood, the brain actually overproduces neurons and synapses. It is this chaotic, overgrown jungle of potential connections. But as we grow up, the brain engages in what is called axon pruning.
Axon pruning?
Yeah, it acts like a ruthless sculptor. It chips away the connections we don't use to make the ones we do use much faster and more efficient. So by the time you are an adult Ephraimite standing at that river, the neural pathways required to perceive and reproduce the sound have literally been pruned away.
So there is a deadline, a window where the brain is primed to learn something, and once it shuts hard.
Exactly. We call them sensitive periods. And the window closes surprisingly early, especially for language. Patricia Cole ran a really fascinating experiment looking at 9-month-old American babies.
9 months old?
Yeah, at 9 months, babies can still distinguish almost any phonetic sound from any human language. So Cole took one group of these babies and exposed them to native Mandarin Chinese speakers who played with them and talked to them in person.
Okay.
Then, a second group was exposed to the exact same Mandarin sounds for the exact same amount of time, but through a television screen playing a DVD.
Okay, I would assume the babies watching the screen picked up at least some of the sounds, right? Given how much media kids consume these days.
You'd think so, but they learned absolutely nothing.
Wait, nothing.
Zero. The babies who interacted with the live human learned to distinguish the Mandarin sounds perfectly. The babies who watched the DVD failed completely.
Wow. So human connection is the mandatory catalyst. I mean, you can't just learn a language from a screen any more than you can learn to swim by reading a book on dry land. You need the emotional water.
That's a great way to put it.
The live social interaction is what triggers the emotional and attentional centers of the brain, telling those synapses, hey, this is important, pour the quick-drying cement right here.
Exactly. And the implication there is massive. Because if acquiring basic phonetic sounds requires deep social and emotional connection, how do we acquire highly complex, abstract values?
This is where we make the leap. If we transition from just pronouncing vowels to holding complex morals, how does that work? Like, do we evolve those morals biologically, or are we somehow infected by them from our culture?
Well, what's fascinating here is how the philosopher Daniel C. Dennett tackles this. He draws a really sharp distinction between Darwinian biological evolution and cultural evolution.
Right.
Dennett looks at how early humans shaped animals, like the King Charles Spaniel, for instance. Early humans didn't sit down with a master methodical blueprint to create a specific type of dog. It was unconscious selection. Over generations, they simply kept the slightly cuter, slightly larger puppies and discarded the rest. So without even intending to, they guided the biological evolution of the species.
And Dennett is arguing that cultural evolution works the exact same way. We unconsciously select ideas that survive. He introduces this concept of cultural fitness.
Yes.
Let's look at the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Dennett compares it to something he calls the tin rule, which is this clunky, overly academic version that goes, do what you would have members of the community of rational agents do.
It's terrible.
It's so bad. Now, logically, the tin rule and the golden rule mean the exact same thing. But the golden rule survives for centuries while the tin rule dies. It's essentially evolutionary marketing. Like, no one is going to buy a bumper sticker that says community of rational agents. The golden rule is catchier, so it replicates.
Exactly. Dennett leans heavily into evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins' concept of memes here. And we aren't talking about internet jokes here.
Right.
A meme is a unit of cultural transmission. It's an idea, a slogan, a moral value, a catchy tune. Memes replicate, they mutate, and they evolve in the cultural environment just like genes do in the biological environment.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Dennett uses a mind-bending analogy to explain how these cultural memes interact with our physical brains. He brings up the ant and the Fluke parasite. Walk us through this.
Oh, this is one of nature's strangest mechanisms. So there is a microscopic parasite called a fluke, and to reproduce and complete its life cycle, the fluke needs to get into the stomach of a grazing animal, like a sheep.
Heck.
But it starts its life inside an ant. So to get from the ant to the sheep, the fluke literally hijacks the ant's brain.
Wow.
It forces the ant to climb up a blade of grass and clamp its jaws onto the very tip, just waiting there until a sheep comes along and eats the grass, the ant, and the parasite all together.
Wait, so the ant is deliberately acting against its own survival instincts? It's committing suicide for the benefit of a passenger in its brain?
Yes. And Dennett argues that memes cultural ideas like freedom, justice, religion, or unselfishness act just like that fluke parasite. They infect human brains.
That is wild.
And they can become so deeply embedded in our neural architecture that they force us to act completely against our selfish biological imperative to survive. They allow us to be extraordinarily unselfish, even to the point of giving our own lives for an abstract ideal.
But those parasitic ideas, those memes, they don't just magically float into our ears, right?
Well,
They have to be planted. They need a specific environment to take root in the brain.
Exactly. The researcher Catherine Nelson focuses heavily on this. She explores the concept of scaffolding. Children do not learn an abstract concept like justice or unselfishness by just reading a dictionary definition. They learn them implicitly over years of situational social interaction. A parent or a teacher acts as a scaffold. They participate in an activity with the child, they guide their responses, correct their behavior, and slowly introduce the cultural norms of their specific society. This process is how a child enters what Nelson calls the community of minds.
So it's all about the environment,
Yeah.
the context. And this aligns perfectly with Eric Brito's perspective in the source text. He points out that scientists get obsessed with asking where learning happens. Is it in the genes? Is it in the neurons? Is it in the culture? When we really should be asking when it happens.
Yeah.
Because learning is entirely situational.
Right. And if we take Brito's situational perspective seriously, it completely blows up the idea of strict biological determinism. The idea that our traits are just hard-coded at birth.
And we need to navigate this carefully. The sources touch on the highly charged debates surrounding the book The Bell Curve, which deals with intelligence and genetics. And just to be absolutely clear to you listening, we are impartially reporting Brito's analysis of the source material here. We're not taking a political side.
Exactly.
But Brito points out that trying to use biology to justify certain social policies, like, say, a laissez-faire society based on the idea that IQ is strictly genetic and unchangeable, is scientifically flawed. If our brains are physically molded by our parents and our environments, like Nelson's scaffolding suggests, then intelligence isn't just a fixed score.
Right. Brito argues that the famous bell curve of IQ is largely a statistical artifact.
Really?
Yeah, test developers continuously correct and adjust the scoring rubrics to ensure the results always force a consistent mean and standard deviation. The curve exists because it is mathematically designed to exist. On top of that, heritability coefficients, which basically measure how much genes influence a trait, they are not static numbers. They swing wildly depending on the environment. If you put a group of people in the exact same environment, genetic differences look huge. But if you change the environment drastically, the environmental impact suddenly dominates the data.
It's the classic is versus ought trap.
Right.
Just because science might observe what biologically is at a given moment in a given environment, that doesn't mean that dictates what ethically ought to be the structure of our society. Like, just because humans might exhibit a biological tendency doesn't mean we are bound by law to build our communities around it.
That's a great point. But this raises an important question, though.
Okay.
If our worldview, our intelligence, and our morals are entirely built by our specific situational scaffolding, by our parents and our in-group, why are we also universally convinced that our specific opinions are absolute, undeniable truths?
Oh man, is the danger of certainty. Emily Parker and Lawrence Barsalou dive into this phenomenon. They theorize that humans deal with two distinct types of certainty: perspectiveless certainty, which they label C, and perspectival certainty, which they label CP.
Right.
And these apply across two very different domains of our lives: the basic perceptual domain and the sociocultural political domain.
Let's clearly define those domains. The basic perceptual domain is just the raw sensory input of the physical world.
So, like a red apple.
Huh.
If you and I are sitting at a table and there is a red apple sitting between us, we both possess basic perceptual certainty, perspectiveless certainty, or see that the apple exists. We don't need to debate our different cultural backgrounds to agree on the apple. It's just a physical fact.
Exactly. And perspectiveless certainty is highly adaptive and necessary in the physical world. If you see a falling rock, you don't ponder the cultural context of the rock, You just move out of the way.
Right.
But the sociocultural political domain is entirely different. This domain contains our beliefs about religion, marriage, politics, justice. These beliefs are constructed entirely by our perspective, our history, and our cultural scaffolding.
Right. The things we learn through the community of minds.
Exactly. They should require perspectival certainty CP. The conscious acknowledgement that I believe this strongly, but I understand it, is shaped by my specific vantage point.
I'm guessing anyone listening right now is thinking, but my political stance is objectively true. Our brains are actively tricking us into thinking an opinion is a physical object, aren't they?
Yeah. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the root of so much human conflict is a massive species-wide cognitive error. We take that red apple certainty, that absolute perspectiveless certainty, and we mistakenly apply it to our highly subjective sociocultural political beliefs.
We treat them like gravity.
Yes. We treat our opinions on complex social structures as if they are absolute physical facts subject to the same indisputable laws.
But why does the human brain make such a massive categorization error? Like, what is the evolutionary benefit?
In-group bonding. Early humans survived by forming tight, fiercely loyal groups. Agreeing unconditionally on a set of absolute truths makes a group incredibly cohesive and willing to sacrifice for each other. Treating your group's beliefs as absolute, perspectiveless facts basically signals your total, unquestioning commitment to the tribe. But the tragic byproduct is that it completely destroys your ability to appreciate that other groups have their own valid perspectives.
So what happens when that in-group bonding goes to the absolute extreme, when that perspectiveless certainty becomes a literal weapon? The text addresses this through Adolf Debanius' clinical analysis of what he calls deadly martyrs, suicide bombers.
Yeah.
And again, we're strictly looking at the clinical neurobiological observation here, but Debania points out something that completely defies our common assumptions. We tend to assume these attackers are just traditional psychopaths.
Right. But the clinical observation reveals a deeply paradoxical psychology. See, traditional psychopaths generally lack empathy entirely, and they act purely for their own selfish gain. Deadly martyrs, however, exhibit an extreme, almost exalted sense of morality and deep, self-sacrificial empathy. But it is exclusively reserved for their own in-group.
Wow.
Simultaneously, they exhibit a radical, completely benumbed amorality toward the outgroup. They mentally reduce the other to an object.
I mean, training soldiers to suppress empathy for an adversary is one of the oldest military tactics in human history.
True, but suicide attackers take this to an evolutionary extreme. They combine that absolute suppression of empathy for the enemy with a complete disregard for their own genetic survival.
Right.
They squander their own existence entirely for the sake of their group's abstract ideals. It is the ultimate fatal manifestation of that Fluke Parasite meme we discussed earlier, hijacking the brain to benefit the cultural idea at the total expense of the biological organism.
It's chilling.
Yeah.
And it forces you to ask, like, if this we versus they boundary is so deeply ingrained in our neural pathways, and it's so potentially destructive, could we ever just erase it? Could we get rid of the outgroup boundary entirely?
Well, Stephen Harnad presents a thought experiment in the text to answer exactly that. But Harnad points out a fundamental quirk of human cognition. Categories only exist if they have a complement.
Meaning?
You only know what a zebra is because the category of non-zebras exists. Harnad illustrates this with a nonsense word. Imagine I teach you the word lilac.
Okay, so if you point to a zebra and say, that's a lilac, and then point to a car and say, that's a lilac, and literally every single thing in the entire universe is a lilac, the word loses all meaning. It means absolutely nothing because it has no opposite.
Precisely. So to erase the concept of them, we would have to make us an uncomplemented category. We would have to figure out how to make a human brain conceptualize a we without ever having a they to compare it to.
That sounds impossible.
Well, Harnad explores this through a fictional story about a highly abstract thinker named Evan. Evan theorizes that all human racism, xenophobia, and selfishness originate from the very first moments of life when a baby imprints on its specific parents. That imprinting creates the first us, which automatically creates them, everyone else.
Right. So to fix this, Evan founds a utopian island called Huma. It's this closed society of 10,000 residents where he attempts to eliminate the nuclear family entirely. He institutes a system called aggregates influx.
Yeah.
Caregivers and romantic partners are rotated constantly, sometimes daily. The idea is that if the people around a child are in a state of unrelenting flux, the child can never imprint on a specific mother or father. The only constant trait they can imprint on is the shared trait of humanity.
And how did you react when you read that?
Reading this, my immediate reaction was visceral horror. Like, is this supposed to be the ultimate form of altruism or a dystopian nightmare? Stripping away a child's parents to engineer out tribalism sounds incredibly damaging.
It definitely challenges the very core of our biological norms. But in Harnaud's fictional experiment, the society actually works for the children.
Really?
Yeah. The children of Huma grow up to be perfectly unselfish, detached, highly cooperative humans. They share everything and prefer no one over anyone else. They achieve the utopian dream of a society without conflict.
But Evan, the architect of this entire system, utterly fails his own experiment.
He does. Evan cannot adapt to the cold, detached world he created. He cannot let go of his previous partner, Frida, who has seamlessly moved on to other partners as the system dictates.
Right.
Even worse, he becomes obsessed with trying to identify his own biological children among the aggregate's influx, which is strictly forbidden. He is desperate for that specific preferential connection that his entire system was designed to destroy.
He's broken by his own invention. And the story ends tragically. Evan's physical health completely fails. He is shipped back to a hospital on the mainland. His organs are shutting down. And the final image is him babbling incoherently to his biological sisters, suffering the exact same fate as his own father. He dies craving the very emotional connections he tried to engineer out of humanity.
It's a heavy ending.
It really is. So what does this all mean? You, listening right now, you are an incredibly complex biological machine. Your brain relies on a plastic network of synapses that demands deep, emotional, localized connections to learn, to grow, and to thrive.
Yeah.
But the grand tragic paradox of the social brain is that those exact same localized connections, the love for your family, the loyalty to your tribe, are what build the rigid we versus they boundaries. The very mechanisms that allow us to love deeply and learn quickly are the exact same ones that pave the way to conflict.
It leaves us in a pretty precarious position. We are biologically wired for both intense, beautiful cooperation and intense, destructive tribalism.
Which leaves me with a final, lingering thought for you to chew on today. Something the text circles around but leaves open. If our brains fundamentally require an out-group, a complement, to define an in-group, is a truly united, peaceful, global human society even neurologically possible? Or, to put it bluntly, would we literally require the sudden appearance of an extraterrestrial threat like a massive, undeniable they from another planet to finally allow our brains to view all of humanity as we?
Wow. It's a profound question about the absolute limits of human neurobiology.
It really is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the social brain. Keep tracking those thoughts, keep questioning your own certainties, and we'll see you next time.